Hello everyone, it's Dave from Calvary Church Ballina, and I'm with you again to talk about this book, Gentle and Lowly, about Christ's heart for sinners and sufferers. Last week we looked at chapter 1 and we saw that the heart of Christ, as he describes it, is gentle and lowly, that he's accessible. And so if that's what his heart is like, then chapter 2 looks at his heart in action. It looks at the fact that, put simply, what he is, he does. He can't be any other way. And so again and again throughout the Gospels, these books that describe Jesus' life here on earth 2,000 years ago, again and again the word compassion comes up to describe how Jesus not just feels, but how he acts. He sees human need and he goes towards it because he has compassion for those in need. In Matthew chapter 8, when the leper says to Jesus, now remember those who had leprosy back then, it was a position of being a social outcast, not just because of the disease, but because the assumption was that because of this disease you were unclean. It made you, to come into contact with someone who had leprosy was to be tainted by their uncleanness. But Jesus encounters this leper in Matthew chapter 8, and the leper says to Jesus, Lord, if you will, you can make me clean. And what does Jesus do? Well, everyone else would pull away, would cross the road to avoid. No, Jesus doesn't do that. He immediately stretches out his hand and he touches the man and he says, I will, be clean. And he heals the man. On page 27, the author of the book points out that time and time again, it's the morally disgusting, the socially reviled, the inexcusable and the undeserving who don't simply receive Christ's mercy, but it's to them, to us, the undeserving sinners, that Christ naturally gravitates. Jesus' enemies, the religious rulers who couldn't stand this about Jesus, they used this as an insult. They described Jesus as the friend of sinners. And it was meant to be something that they labelled him with as an insult. But Jesus did not see that as an insult. Indeed, he saw himself as the friend of sinners. And he naturally gravitates towards us. The holy God, perfect in every way, his righteousness untainted, and yet because of his heart, his gentle, lowly, accessible heart, he gravitates towards sinners, towards needy, undeserving, broken, sinful rebels like you and me. Friends, there's no better news than that. That is the gospel. That is the good news of Jesus, that he is the friend of sinners and that he provides forgiveness. And in this chapter, Dane Ortlund points out the idea of cleanness in the Old Testament. Uncleanness, usually, if someone was unclean, if they were seen as morally unclean, ceremonially, religiously unclean, then their uncleanness, if a clean person came into contact with them, the clean person would be infected, would become unclean. And Jesus reverses that. He, as the very clean one, the perfectly clean one, when he comes into contact with the unclean, rather than become tainted by them, the opposite occurs. His righteousness, his cleanness, his forgiveness goes from him into them. He's able to offer us forgiveness and cleanness before God. And you might say, well, that's what it was like. That's what Jesus was like in his actions 2,000 years ago when he walked the face of the earth. But what about today? Well, on page 32, it points out that Hebrews chapter 13, verse 8 tells us Jesus Christ is the same yesterday and today and forever. The same Jesus who wept at the tomb of Lazarus, he weeps with us in our lonely despair today. We have a Jesus who is the friend of sinners. So join me next week as we look at chapter 3 on next Wednesday. Thanks for joining me. Bye.